Well, good evening, everyone. I'm coming to you this month from sunny Carlsbad, California, where I'm spending the month. I would give you a quick tour and show you the Pacific, which is right out in front of me behind that window shade. But why don't we get right to the business at hand instead? I guess I should have. I couldn't shoot toward the window because the light would have overwhelmed me, and I would have been in shadow. But maybe that would have been preferred. Anyway, as you know from the topic today, I'm going to talk about libertarianism in terms of the moral and the practical, because I think I've always been puzzled by the common division of these two things, and I had some thoughts that I put down on paper not too long ago, drawing from some of my favorite contemporary philosophers. So let me go through the opening remarks, then we can open up the discussion and see if I've had any sense or if I've overlooked anything, or if I've let you in on something maybe hasn't occurred to you before. So we'll see what happens. Now, if I were to say that a government activity, let's say public schooling or the war on selected drug merchants and users, helps turn the inner cities into hellholes and otherwise make people's lives miserable, is that a moral objection or a practical, namely utilitarian or generally consequentialist objection? Some libertarians are inclined to say that that's a utilitarian objection or a practical objection rather than a moral objection. But I've long been uncomfortable with this answer. For one thing, valid or not, utilitarianism is a moral theory. So utilitarian objections cannot be excluded from the realm of moral propositions. That a policy destroys the inner cities sure sounds like a moral objection. Yet often libertarians will not call that a moral objection. Rather, they'll call that a practical or utilitarian objection to, say, the drug war. Leaving that aside, we must inquire, whether libertarian concerns are really divisible into a concern with duties, namely deontology. That's the term used in philosophy, moral philosophy. Say regarding individual rights, duties regarding the respecting of individual rights. And a concern with practical consequences. This is an unfortunate feature of many libertarians' thinking, but it's not confined to libertarians. In this bifurcated view of the human world, there is a list of moral do's and don'ts that are not directly related to practical, so-called practical matters, specifically the conditions under which human beings can prosper. That strikes me as odd, if for no other reason than that in this view, the moral side appears to outrank the practical side. Success is nice, success at living is nice, but the ethical test has priority. You hear libertarians say that they would favor freedom even if it did not promote good things, good outcomes like prosperity, because people have a right to freedom that is unrelated to any consequences. Parenthetically, I want to say that, of course, they don't believe that freedom could have bad consequences. But the question is that just a happy coincidence? And more on this later on. Now, I'm hardly alone in my uneasiness with this separation. In my camp is no less a personage than Adam Smith. So I want to put up a passage from The Wealth of Nations. Okay. Okay, so here's the passage. Here's a passage from The Wealth of Nations. It spans a couple of screens. I also read it. The happiness and perfection of a man, considered not only as an individual, but as the member of a family, of a state, and of the great society of mankind, was the object which the ancient moral philosophy proposed to investigate. In that philosophy, the duties of human life were treated as subservient to the happiness and perfection of human life. But when moral, as well as natural philosophy, we go to the next one. But when moral as well as natural philosophy came to be taught only as subservient to theology, the duties of human life were treated as chiefly subservient to the happiness of a life to come. In ancient philosophy, the perfection of virtue was represented as necessarily productive to the person who possessed it of the most perfect happiness in this life. In the modern philosophy, it was frequently represented as generally, or rather as almost always, inconsistent with any degree of happiness in this life, and heaven was to be earned only by penance and mortification, by the austerities and abasement of a monk. not by the liberal, generous, and spirited conduct of a man. Casuistry and an ascetic morality made up, in most cases, the greater part of the moral philosophy of the schools. By far the most important of all the differences of different branches of philosophy became in this matter by far the most corrupted. So what Smith is saying here is he's making a contrast between ancient philosophy, which he's clearly more favorable to, and modern philosophy. In ancient philosophy, he said, and he's talking here about Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, morality was concerned with how to live in order to flourish and achieve happiness for the individual, but as a member of society, because they saw the individual human being as a social animal. So morality was concerned with flourishing. And therefore, the duties, as he puts it, were subservient to the requirements of flourishing. He says modern philosophy became corrupted when it got divorced from this, and he actually said when it became more subservient to theology. And there the duties, the virtues, were not related to flourishing here on earth, but had to do something with, had more to do with afterlife. And then, in fact, they didn't serve the purposes of happiness in the here and now. So this is this division that Smith finds. Now, in commenting on this passage in the Freeman some years ago, the libertarian philosopher Tibor Machan and a co-author named David Brown wrote the following. It was an article called "The Self-Imposed Poverty of Economics." So here's what they wrote. Smith saw that when morality or ethics is conceived along lines that would be fully realized in the work of Immanuel Kant, who denied that anything done to advance one's own cause can have moral significance, moral thinking cannot embrace the virtue of prudence or practical wisdom, nor can any moral virtue be construed or justified, however broadly, in relation to the acting agent's own well-being and flourishing. But prudence, recognized as a prominent virtue indeed in the ethics of Socrates and Aristotle, would make plenty of room for an ethical conception of most economic activity. With prudence expelled from the moral realm, however, all the economists can do to render commerce and business respectable is to collapse them along with the rest of life into the expressions of mere bodily functions, a la Thomas Hobbes. So that's Machan and Brown elaborating on Smith's point, that once you do make this separation between virtue and flourishing, if you're going to defend flourishing, now you can't do it in terms of virtue because the separation's been made. And so philosophers are often driven in a Hobbesian direction and had to just claim that these are things we had to do, like as he puts it, near bodily functions. As we see, the division of human life into the moral and the practical is of recent vintage, fairly recent vintage. Smith's reference to ancient philosophy, as I noted, is a reference to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, for whom this chasm would be unfathomable. Moral inquiry for them was essentially an investigation into the art of living as a reasoning, language-using social being. The concern of ethics, according to Aristotle, is to learn how such a being must think and act in order to flourish individually and as a member of society. The object of consideration is, quote, as Aristotle puts it, the practical life of man as possessing reason, close quote. That's why prudence or practical wisdom finds a place on his list of virtues. In Rational Man, a modern interpretation of Aristotelian ethics, Henry Veitch, very good philosopher, elaborates on why ethics may be regarded as the art of living, although to be sure an art unlike all other arts. So I, for one, don't accept the division of the case for freedom into the moral on the one hand and the practical. It's a mistake to, and not to mention harmful to the cause. But does this mean that someone who takes my position is a consequentialist or a utilitarian? And my answer to that is no. The consequentialist case for freedom is too insecure. How would you feel if someone said, I will respect your rights to life, liberty, and property so long as I calculate that doing so will produce the greatest good? How comfortable would that make you feel? I'll respect your rights just as long as I regard that as productive of the greatest good. That does leave open the possibility that tomorrow I might decide that it doesn't in your case and hit you over the head and take your wallet or something along those lines. It doesn't seem like a very secure case for freedom. The classic monkey wrench in the utilitarian machine is the question whether one person may morally be killed so that his harvested organs may save the lives of 5 others. If we're talking about the greatest good for the greatest number, can a doctor kill a healthy person in order to distribute his organs to 5 other people? You have a net gain of 4 lives, right? If assuming the 5 are going to die and the 1 does die, that's a net gain of 4. Does that mean utilitarianism calls on us then to do that? Perhaps utilitarianism does, but does the fear thus engendered, in other words, the fear that you could be killed so that your organs can be harvested, does that fear subtract from the total happiness? And if so, how does it all net out? You're adding to happiness by saving 4 people, but on the other hand, you're subtracting from the total happiness because people now live in fear that a doctor may kill them. How do we do the calculus and decide which is the better policy from the standpoint of utilitarianism? That's the big question, and it seems to me it can't be done. You can't net out the good and bad consequences and decide what to do. Moreover, as Gary Chartier emphasizes in his book Anarchy and Legal Order, the components of well-being, in other words, what makes up our well-being, are disparate things and they're incommensurable. There's not a single reducible underlying homogeneous element known as well-being. There's just a lot of things that we prefer that make our lives better, and you can't net them out somehow, add them together. You can't come up with an aggregate. There's no numerical operations you can do. Now, one response to this is to say, yes, it's true, act utilitarian, act or direct utilitarianism, in which each action is to be evaluated according to whether it will produce the greatest good, happiness, or pleasure, is indeed problematic. Okay, that's known as act utilitarianism or direct. However, if we substitute for it rule or indirect utilitarianism, which is what Henry Hazlitt's position is in his book, The Foundations of Morality, according to which it is rules, not individual acts, but rules that are to be judged according to their tendency to create the greatest good, namely by maximizing social cooperation. So, again, just to make the distinction clear, act utilitarianism says you have to judge each act on whether it's going to produce the greatest good for the greatest number. And then you act or don't act, depending on how you decide. There's a problem with that, as I said, because you have to do some calculus that can't be done. So people attempted to repair utilitarianism, and Henry Hazlitt is one person who subscribed to this, in terms of rule utilitarian. So it's not the individual acts that get judged, it's the general rules. And if a rule, if you decide that a rule tends to produce the greatest happiness or the greatest good, then that rule is adopted. That's the rule that's adopted. So you don't judge it on a case-by-case basis. You pick the rules and then you obey the rule. Now, this seems like a promising approach, but as Roderick Long points out, there's a problem. And I think I have, no, I don't have I don't have I thought I had a slide on that one. This seems like a promising approach, but here's the problem, as Roderick Long points out. Quote, "It has often been claimed that indirect utilitarianism is unstable and must collapse into either direct utilitarianism on the one hand or rules fetishism on the other." So here's what this means. A robust rule, a hardy rule utilitarian will follow a rule utilitarian now, will follow a rule even when it is not expected to maximize good consequences. Remember what I said, a rule utilitarian is not an act utilitarian. So he's judging things by rules. And once he finds a rule that he believes tends to produce good consequences, like the greatest good for the greatest number, he then obeys that rule. He follows that rule no matter what. In that case, though, by following the rule, rather than attempting to maximize the good, he's become no longer a utilitarian at all, but a rule follower or a deontologist or a practitioner of deontology. In other words, following the rule now becomes the objective. This rule utilitarian can't decide, well, in this case, I won't follow the rule because the consequences won't be good. They won't maximize the good. If he were to do that, he would no longer be a rule utilitarian. He would be an act utilitarian. So he's got to say, even though in this case, I don't believe the rule will produce the maximum good, I still must follow the rule because I want everyone else to follow it. And therefore, I'm going to follow it even when I don't think it's the right, when I don't believe it's going to maximize the good. But in that case, he's no longer a utilitarian. He's a practitioner of deontology. Thus, utilitarianism seems to be fatally flawed. It either becomes deontology or rule utilitarianism is flawed, or it becomes act utilitarianism. But act utilitarianism is incoherent because you can't do it the calculus. You can't figure out in any given case whether the good outweighs the bad or whether it maximizes happiness, pleasure, or whatever standard it is. So there's obviously a problem there. In the Aristotelian approach, which is also known as eudaimonism or virtue ethics, a concern, well, let me back up a step. If we're rejecting now utilitarianism and consequentialism in general, does that mean now we have to become rules fetishists? In other words, deontologists. We have to just be slavish followers of rules no matter what. And to that we can also say no, just like we said no to consequentialism. Because we have another approach, the Aristotelian approach, in which a concern with consequences is justified. Don't forget, we're interested in the practical life of man as possessing reason. We're interested in flourishing. We can't be oblivious to consequences. But the concern with consequences figures in, it's built into the very formulation of the virtues. Just as consideration of virtue, such as justice or respect for rights, figures in our formulation of what constitutes good consequences. So let me give you a quote from Roderick Long on this. On this view, human welfare, whether individual or general, and justice are conceptually interrelated. So welfare being the practical side of things, so-called, under this false division, and justice being the virtue or the deontological side of it. Long is saying that on this view, these two things are conceptually interrelated, with neither concept being basic, but each depending in part on the other and all the other virtues for its content, just as Aristotle defines virtue and human flourishing in terms of one another. Roderick, by the way, goes into this point in very nice detail in a paper you might want to look up called "Why Does Justice Have Good Consequences?" If you Google that, you'll find that I really commend the paper. Why does justice have good consequences? So in this Aristotelian approach, there's no dichotomy between the practical, how do you achieve welfare, and justice or respect for rights, because the very conception of those two things are interrelated at the very foundational level. What we believe about justice figures in our conception of welfare, human welfare, but what we believe about human welfare figures into our conception of justice. They're not separate things that are, like sort of different rooms are figured out. There's a co-relationship, a mutual relationship between the virtues, among all the virtues. Finally, both sides of the artificial moral practical divide need each other. I mean, the consequentialists and the deontologists, we're going to use those terms, they need each other if the strongest case for freedom is to be made. Long writes in the paper I just mentioned, I think I have this on the slide. Most people are unlikely to find the deontological case for a given course of action compelling, so long as they believe it would have terrible consequences. Likewise, they're equally unlikely to find the consequentialist case compelling, so long as they believe that the action violates human dignity or equality or liberty. So I think he makes a very good point here. If you simply made a justice case, a deontological case for liberty, but people believe that, let's say, a huge amount of society would be, very, very poor, and only a small segment of society would be well off. I think it would be much harder to sell the case for liberty, even if you could convince them that liberty was somehow just. If they thought it was going to have those terrible consequences, you're going to have a very difficult time convincing them, and you may not convince them at all. On the other hand, if you make a case that freedom has good consequences, you make a consequentialist case that living standards will rise and generally life will be pleasant. If the person who you're making this case to believes that in important ways human dignity will be assaulted, you're going to, in other words, if deontological considerations, so-called moral considerations, can't be fulfilled, you're going to have a harder case against. You're going to have a tough time selling freedom to that person, even if they believe there are going to be certain good consequences. They're going to have huge reservations if they believe it fails in some moral way. So the two sides need each other. We need to show that there are both good consequences and that the common moral considerations are upheld. But there's more to this than a strategic consideration. I don't mean to argue that this is just a matter of strategy. Let me go back to Roderick Long. In real life, one rarely finds members of either camp relying solely on a single set of considerations. It is a rare moral or political polemic indeed that does not include both consequentialist and deontological arguments. Whatever they may say officially, most consequentialists would be deeply disturbed to discover that their favorite policy slighted human dignity, and most deontologists would be deeply disturbed to discover that their favorite policies had disastrous consequences. I think he's right about this. The diehard utilitarian would not want to learn that his own policies contain major assaults on human dignity, and the deontologist who believed in justice and rights would lose some enthusiasm for his own case if he believed that the consequences were very negative. So this suggests, as Roderick says, that, quote, most professed deontologists and consequentialists are actually, to their credit, crypto-eudaimonists. So eudaimonism is the Aristotelian approach that I described before, where the consequential and the virtue orientation are built in together and co-determine each other at the very base of the subject, at the beginning of the inquiry. So this is a very big subject. I hope that this was clear. It's not the easiest thing to talk about or write about. It's complicated, and I'm still always striving to get a better handle on it. But I hope what I said was enough to justify seeing the moral and practical case for freedom as really one and the same. And more than that, I hope I said enough to launch some interesting discussion here. So I'm going to unmute the microphones now. I'm hearing a feedback. Is it me? Yeah, I'm hearing myself. Is someone not using a headset of some kind? Because I think what happens is my voice is coming out and then going back through the microphone. I think that did it. Okay. So we have about half an hour or so to discuss this. I hope I said enough to provoke some discussion. Does anybody want to start things off? Anybody?
I'm going to buck my own trend and just say I agree.
Oh, well, you're no fun. Oh, no, we're
good this time.
Now we're getting.
They're interlocked.
It sounds like a lawnmower just passed through one of the rooms. Okay, huh? It's quiet.
Yeah, they're
now.
interlocked. It is what it is.
Yeah, it seems to me that they are, but someone surely will disagree. Any consequentialists out there or deontologists? Somebody want to say something? Can anybody hear me? Hello. Well, come on. I surely didn't convince everybody just in that very convoluted discussion.
Well, I'd like. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hello.
Yes, I hear you.
I'd like to return to the the surgeon can kill one person and distribute distribute the organs to poor people and save them.
Okay, go ahead.
Now, what if you were the surgeon? What would you do?
I wouldn't. I would respect the rights of that one person. I don't think you can justify killing a person, certainly an innocent person, to save 4 others. Now I know you can get into very tough questions, and Adam Smith talked about this in the Theory of Moral Sentiments. I mean, what if you could save 1 billion people? You can make it tougher, right? But what if you can save 1 billion people by sacrificing one?
Well, vaccines kind of go there, don't they? In the case of vaccines, they've actually indemnified the vaccine producers from the responsibility of even killing people as long as they protect a whole bunch of people from actually getting the virus that the vaccine is for or whatever. Well, I guess they get the virus, they still get the symptoms or something.
So what do you mean, the government relieves them of liability?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's an obvious, and
that's based on that whole idea. Oh, we will kill 20,000 people this year, but we will save 400,000 people, or whatever. You get the idea.
Right, but of course there you have a government intervention, right, creating the liabilities.
Right.
And yeah, I suppose that would be justified on some sort of utilitarian grounds. But so I guess
that's the way I hear it justified.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, people very often are utilitarians sometime, and then other times when it doesn't suit them, they're not utilitarians. You know, then they say, oh, that's wrong. I don't care about the consequences. It's wrong.
Well, back to the you being the surgeon and you save 1 billion people.
Yeah.
Is there a number where you would flinch?
Well, I'm not going to take an innocent life. I mean, it's easy. Look, it's easy for me to say, right? I'm sitting in a kitchen. The situation's not confronting me. I can say anything, can't I? I can't tell you how I would think if I was actually in the situation. I would like to think that I would not take an innocent life. But let me turn it around. How do you see it?
Well, I would try to do it exactly the way you've described. And then there would be, as you said, there would be other circumstances that might impact it as well. Like this person is suspected of murder, or this person is... yeah, I mean, you made the statement, I wouldn't take an innocent life. Well, what does that mean exactly? Since
let me get it from another direction. Let me do something that Murray Rothbard would like to do in cases like this. We're always looking at it as, would you do X? Or would you do Y? But Rothbard would put it this way. When you're doing political philosophy and moral philosophy, especially political philosophy, you have to look at it from the sort of the Lone Ranger's perspective. He sees you about to kill this innocent person in order to save 5. The Lone Ranger rides down from the hilltop and comes to save that person. Has he done something wrong? It seems to me he hasn't. It seems to me the guy you're about to kill has the right to self-defense, doesn't he? After all, he didn't do anything wrong.
He has to shoot the scalpel out of your hand without hurting you.
Well, assuming those problems away, okay, we don't want to get. I don't think we need to get too bogged down in those kinds of details. It's the principle. Does this person that you're about to kill, or an agent for that person, have a right to step in and save his life? It seems to me it's unquestionable. Yes. The answer is yes. Don't you think? He's being wrongly killed. I mean, a utilitarian, I guess, wouldn't say it's wrongly, but many other perspectives would say it's wrongly, and therefore the Lone Ranger can save him. It seems to me.
I think the crux is on whether that person would want to be saved.
Sure. Isn't there a presumption that he would want to be saved?
Yeah, I think so, but that comes up sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Suicide and things like that.
Well, suicide, of course, is a different story, but if you find a person in a coma on the street,
I guess the classic example is somebody steps in front of a bus.
Yeah.
if you save them from stepping in front of the bus, are you violating their right to freedom? Right? You and I would say that the answer is, well, if you could reasonably believe they would want to be saved from the bus, then you aren't.
Right.
Yeah.
You didn't.
And if you were wrong, then you pay the consequence.
Yeah.
Well, if you're wrong, you can push him in front of the next bus.
Well, wait a second. We can say a few more things. Does he have a right to step in front of a bus, risking the people on the bus? I think you could stop him. If he wants to go privately commit suicide where he doesn't hurt somebody else, that's his business. But if he's stepping in front of a bus, or even jumping out of a building, maybe he's going to fall on something.
I congratulate you. You're the first person I ever heard think of the people on the bus.
Well, in philosophy there is this tough case, supposedly a tough case. Again, it's utilitarian. You're on a train or a subway of some kind, and you're coming up to a Y, right, in the fork in the road in the track.
Yeah.
And there's 10 people you're going to kill if you go one way. If the way it's going to go is hit 10 people. That's if you do nothing. You could, I'm sorry, I have it wrong, 100 people. You could turn it and make it hit only 10 people. So if you do nothing, you're going to kill 100 people. But if you intervene, you're going to kill 10 people. You will kill 10 people.
That's the catch, of course, is that they put the onus on you by saying you killed them by doing nothing. And that's the flaw in the argument, of course.
Right. That's why it's tough, because really you didn't kill them if you do nothing. Yeah. And if you do something, you're going to kill fewer people, but still kill a lot of innocent people.
Then you will kill them. That's the odd part.
Right. You will kill them, but you will have killed them in order to save 100. So as a good utilitarian will have to say you did the right thing.
And because I view myself as a creative person, I would simply set the switch midway and derail the engine.
Well, I think we could take, we can sort of step a level upward and look down on these events and say, all of these are of the nature of emergencies. They're extraordinary, exceptional cases. Thank goodness it's not the normal, everyday occurrence. We shouldn't pick our ethics, and this is a point that Ayn Rand made. You don't pick your ethics on the basis of emergencies. They're by definition exceptions.
Yeah,
so
she went on quite a bit about how they use lifeboat situations to decide the rules based on the exceptions.
Right. I mean, you can spend all night talking over tough cases, and what have you gotten at the end? You may have a better idea what you can do in very rare cases, and like I said, thank goodness they're rare. I remember being a student at libertarian seminars, summer seminars, and people would talk all night about, okay, there are 3 men in a lifeboat, but it can only support 2, and whose property is it? And they go all night on this. I wrote an article later called Rub-a-Dub-Dub, 3 Men in a Tub, The Ethics of Emergencies. I'm not sure I convinced anybody, but I'm not sure they tell us very much. They're not that helpful. They're interesting, but I'm not sure they're very helpful. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I read Murray Rothbard's book, The Ethics of Liberty, I thought it was terrific because he started with the non-aggression principle, the fact that each of us own our own body, that we have a right to private property. And as he worked through that book, he developed it into a consistent set of themes. So that's a book that speaks to my heart. But how about you? Is it Aristotle? Is it Nicomachean Ethics? Where do you start from?
Well, I didn't come up reading Aristotle. I came up reading Rand and then Rothbard, but that led me to and Rothbard, was an Aristotelian. He said that, and his background is natural law. His good friend back in those earlier days was Leonard Liggio, who knew the natural law theorists from the Middle Ages very well, and therefore Aristotle, because he informed all that. So I see that as a single tradition. There may be variations from thinker to thinker, but I see it as a sort of a single tradition. Rand, let me recommend a work by Roderick Long, which you can get on Amazon. It's a thin booklet. It was a journal article originally, and then they made it into a booklet called Reason and Value. And Roderick Long makes a very good point there Rand got him thinking about philosophy, so he pays a huge amount of tribute to Rand for getting him interested in philosophy. But one of the things he says he learned over the years in reading Aristotle and Socrates is that where Rand claimed to make improvements on Aristotle, that's exactly where her weakest spots are. And I found that an extremely helpful piece of work in sorting out my own thinking. So I recommend that for anybody. But so to answer your question, I'm in that sort of Rothbard Aristotelian tradition.
And when you said reason and value, did you mean Roderick Long or did you mean Joseph Raz?
No, Roderick Long.
Okay.
It's called Reason and Value. I think it's called. I think the subtitle is, Aristotle versus Rand or something like that. Rand versus Aristotle. If you go to Amazon, you'll find
Correct. I'm looking at a link to it right now. That's what it says.
It's a very good work. I mean, I've read it a few times. It's very rich. It takes a reading of. It takes multiple readings, actually. It did in my case. And he talks about both her epistemology and her ethics to show that Aristotle, actually, where she dismissed Aristotle and said he made errors, that's actually where she falls back. And also he talks about how there are big differences between the implicit ethics in the novels and her explicit ethics in her nonfiction writings. The novels are superior to the nonfiction writing in when she gets into writing about ethics. Anyway, anybody else want to talk? Go ahead.
You would agree that you have a right to defend yourself.
Sure.
Now, on bad days, I want to take Obama and kill him. Now, is that defending myself?
Oh, well, it's certainly it's not a very effective defense, right? It won't free you. So
no, I know that.
We can answer it that way.
It reminds me of shooting the child picking the daisies.
Does he deserve?
What you're doing is not commensurate.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the action.
Right. The question is, does he deserve to die for what he's done? And or does I don't believe in capital punishment. So I would say no. He just deserves he deserves to make restitution to all of us. How's that?
Okay, I agree with that. I would like to stop. I would like to stop him from continuing his behavior.
Yeah, I'd settle for that. Just kick him out. But don't let anyone else in. Don't let anyone else in.
And that's where some people think that monkey wrenching, if we're kind of looking at that topic sideways, monkey wrenching is probably a superior method of doing that type of thing.
Yeah. But now we're going to slide into libertarian strategy. And
yeah, right.
Does anyone want to say more about the moral philosophy that I
yeah,
covered?
I wanted to add something about myself being more of a deontologist.
Yes, go.
And I think that helps me whenever the situation comes, and let's say there's a shooting, and people will tell me, okay, the only solution is to kill that person. But maybe if I have my morals correct, and I think that is wrong to kill that guy, maybe I would try to shoot at his leg, or to do something, or to tries to avoid the last situation, which is bad for everyone, that person is killed. So maybe you find more imaginative solutions, knowing that that ultimate solution is wrong. That are more imaginative. I don't know.
Well, I think you can get to your same position not by deontology, but just by Aristotelian virtue ethics. Killing is wrong for a lot of reasons, not only deontological reasons.
Do you agree there are some people who are so warped they just simply act out all the time, and you can't shoot them in the leg. That won't stop them. It's almost like you have to either exile them, in which case who are they going to pick on there?
Yeah.
Or do you kill them?
Well, now we're back to the topic we did, I think, last month on crime and punishment. So we're repeating.
Yeah.
I'd like to warn people off of the shooting in the leg strategy. It's not a real strategy, so don't even take that seriously.
It hasn't worked for you?
No, the way the philosophy of using a handgun in self-defense is you shoot to center mass, because that's the best way to defend yourself.
You're right.
You're not shooting to kill. You're shooting for the best stop. Shooting for the leg is considered foolish, to put it bluntly.
It's a tough shot, like trying to shoot a gun out of somebody's hand. You just piss the person off really bad, and he comes and gives you a thrashing. So,
but I only brought it up because it sounded like it was attractive to people, and
yeah. If you watch westerns, you see lots of good guys shooting the gun out of a Lone Ranger shooting the gun out of people's hands, but that's easier said than done. So I agree with yeah.
It's an attractive option in a virtual world.
Right, but there, like one of the speakers said, you're not shooting to kill; you're shooting to stop the threat, and that's the surest way to do it. So it's a byproduct. It's a double. What do they call that in just war theory? A double consequence or something like that.
I'm sorry I brought it up. I just didn't want anybody to try it.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the point. I've read quite a bit about that myself. So does the gentleman who was it Carlos who identified himself as a deontologist?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yes.
Did I understand your point correctly that because you're a deontologist, you would do anything to avoid killing a person? Did I understand you correctly?
Yeah. Yeah, my point is that I would try to do my best not to kill him. Of course, if I see that I shoot him in the leg, that doesn't help anything, I would maybe kill him. I mean, that would be the last option. But of course, I also live in a real world, and I try to avoid any further killings. But the fact that I see that killing is wrong, maybe I find other solutions. I'm saying this because sometimes, I mean, I've been they tried to rob me in the street, and many people would have just punched in the head, and I tried to talk these people into not robbing or find other solutions, and the thing worked out. So sometimes you put the blame on the others, like being completely strangers and being evil, and maybe having a lot more of empathy against these people or towards these people. I mean, the golden rule will see the light in a way. Well, maybe
there's a legal doctrine which seems to be consistent with liberty, and that has to do with excessive force or disparate force, the amount of force that's required to defend yourself.
Yeah.
And I believe it's consistent with liberty and legal doctrine that you don't use more force than a reasonable person would consider necessary. So if you're armed with, say, a baton, and you're armed with a gun, and the baton will work, then you wouldn't shoot the person. That's the idea.
Right. My only comment was you could get there without being a deontologist. That was really the only distinction I was going to make. Roderick Long embraces a law of proportionality, and he wouldn't call himself a deontologist. He's an Aristotelian. And so he would say you can't use any more force than necessary to stop a threat, if we're talking about somebody.
And from a utilitarian standpoint, that's the best outcome, right? The least harm.
Yeah, you would think that in most cases that would be the case too. So there the three would line up, right? You can get to the same result very often from the three positions.
Right. Right, but if you're on an airplane and somebody gets up with a box cutter and you say, I'm not going to kill this person, that's going over the top, so they end up in the cockpit and there you are.
Right. Actually, I don't think I quite stated it satisfactorily what I said before. It's not that you use the maximum force necessary, or I guess it would be what? The minimum force necessary to stop the threat. You can't violate the law of proportionality even to stop a threat. For example, the example he uses, which is admittedly an extreme example, a child is about to step on your foot, and you could shoot the child to prevent the child from stepping on your foot. The child has no right to step on your foot. That's granted.
Santa Mass.
But even if the only thing you can do is kill that child, he would say you have to let the child step on your foot. Because
the harm is so limited.
Yeah, the penalty is so out of proportion to what's happening. So that has to be taken into account. But any of these can. Aristotelianism can sometimes sound like deontology, right? Where you're just pretty much rigidly obeying certain rules. But since those rules were derived out of the requirements for flourishing, they don't really fall into sort of a Kantian style deontology, because the very purpose is to create the conditions under which you can flourish in a social setting, because human beings are social beings. Anyway, someone else, I'm talking too much.
I'd like to talk about libel.
Okay.
Because
now,
here you have
okay.
purportedly one person is being injured versus freedom of speech, which I always err on. Say whatever. I believe you should be allowed to say anything you want about anybody, anytime.
Well, that was Rothbard's position as well. I mean, and of course, it doesn't mean that you should say anything you want about somebody. But his point was, the way he put it sort of philosophically, is that you don't own your reputation, right? Because your reputation exists in the minds of other people. It's other people's thoughts about you. So you can't claim ownership of it. And people are willing, certainly free to challenge this after my quick description of his position. Go at it if you want to. So his point is that your rights are not violated if someone harms your reputation by talking to other people.
I recommend Walter Block defending the undefendable for this type of question.
Right.
Because he's very creative.
Right. So that's the basic argument, that a person is engaging in speech, not destroying your property because you can't own your reputation. Now, he wouldn't deny that you can't harm somebody's interests by spreading, let's say, spreading untruths about them. And my view is that in a free society, there are ways, even today, there are ways to deal with such things. The internet makes it easier if you've been unjustly maligned. But I think Rothbard's probably right on the point that the way we conceive libel in the law today, it's as if there's a property rights violation. In other words, your reputation has been damaged, and that's your property. I think there is a problem with that, and that if you accept that view, it seems to me it would lead to other problems as well. We're going to talk about intellectual property next month, by the way, but this is not patents or copyright, so we can talk about this a little bit if you want. Anyone else want to weigh in on the libel defamation issue?
Well, I agree with you that Murray Rothbard in Ethics of Liberty, that same book, would take the position that you just argued he would take. That is, the blackmail is not unethical. But he also argued that those things are, for him, immoral.
Yeah, that's right. He would distinguish rights and morality. Rights don't coincide with morality. Something can be moral and rights violating. For example, I think he'd say, well, let me think. Moral but rights violating. Like you're in a wilderness, you're dying because of the snow and the elements, and you come upon somebody's cabin who's not home at the time. Can you break into the cabin to save your life, basically? I would say yes, but I would think you should pay compensation later. I don't know what Rothbard says about compensation. He may feel that you should too. But he would say that's a moral thing to do because you're saving your life, but he would say it does, strictly speaking, violate the rights of the person because you didn't get advance permission.
I remember that example, and you're right. That is what he said. You should pay them back if it's possible for you to do it. It might be the case that you don't know who to pay back. You don't know how to go about doing that, in which case there's another set of rules that kick in.
Right. That's true. Of course, you can get around that by saying you can leave a note with your name and address. Call me and I'll pay you, stuff like that. But
that's legal in many Western countries, by the way.
Yeah.
Breaking into people's property to feed yourself in an emergency and so forth.
Yeah, that doesn't really surprise me. I can see that. No, and I'm not sure I can fully explain this, but Roderick takes issue with the Rothbard George Smith position that something can be moral but rights violating. I think he wants to. How does he want? I forget exactly how he says that. He thinks the two are much closely aligned, morality. In other words, justice is part of morality. Justice meaning respecting rights. And so he doesn't see them diverging, where something could be a moral act that violates rights. and for some reason I am not able to repeat his argument right now. It's not exactly coming to me. He sees.
It sounds like an artifact of religion. That divergence.
Well, that gets back to the points Adam Smith made in the passage,
right?
That I read. That's what he said. That it's sort of religion that created that splitting off, and he prefers the ancients keeping them together. So
I guess altruism is a great example of that. Undue altruism, perhaps.
I'll have to look up Roderick's argument again on why he doesn't want to split. He doesn't see morality as something larger than. Well, I shouldn't. Maybe that's not the right way to put it either. I should stop on that point because I don't want to misstate his position. I'm going to have to look up his position.
Would you agree that fraud violates somebody's rights?
I think it does, and on the grounds that it's the way I always learned it, that someone has gotten property from you on terms other than you would have agreed to. That's what happens with fraud, right? They say, give me $10 and I'll deliver you a bag of, sugar, and it turns out it's talcum powder. You wouldn't have traded $10. You wouldn't have traded $10 for talcum powder. So they got your property on terms you wouldn't have agreed to. So I think, I don't think that's just free speech. Some people have tried to say, well, isn't fraud just a matter of speech, and how can you libertarians be against it? Excuse me, there's good grounds to be against it. Does that make sense?
Well, I agree. It's just there's such a difficult gray area between libel and fraud.
Well, it seems pretty separate to me. Say more about that.
Well, if you say this person is a totally wonderful person, that person is a crook, and you're lying because you know darn well it's the opposite. But you've stated it sort of as an opinion, but you've misled somebody into.
Well, but it's not a transaction, right? And you're not getting, some value from the other person on terms that turn out not to be the real terms. So it seems to me different in an important
Fraud
way.
has a booty and a damage. Libel is, well, that was wrong, and you said that. It wasn't, oh, I can show you that I lost this because you did that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's an additional, fraud probably has the additional requirement that the person benefits, right?
The bigger question is, do you owe somebody the truth in general? So let me give you an example. You're hiking. You and a friend are hiking, and you get to this little bridge over a chasm, which you're not quite sure about. Looks something out of Indiana Jones, right? But there's an old codger sitting there, kind of half dozing in his chair, obviously from around there. And you say to him, "Is this bridge safe?" And he says, "Yes." And you start crossing the bridge, and it's a rope bridge, breaks, and you fall to your death. Sure. Is that guy culpable? What do you think?
Morally.
Has he violated rights? Has he killed you?
No.
So you don't think he owed you the truth, in other words? So he didn't wrong you by not giving you...
Yes, I think he owes me the truth, and he didn't violate my rights by lying about it.
So he did something immoral that was not rights violating.
He didn't force me on the bridge.
True.
It's that strange libertarian situation of the jerk who didn't violate anybody's rights.
I'm going to have to see what Roderick says about that.
I might violate his rights if I survive the fall.
Yeah,
and I would think a libertarian court would understand that, and probably you would have lesser penalties than you otherwise would for similarly violating his rights.
But if you got, let's say you were just injured, you wouldn't have any claim to restitution for your medical costs.
No.
Yeah. That's an interesting case. It's not one of those cases that, it's one of those cases that scares non-libertarian off, away.
And who's to say he wasn't evaluating whether the bridge was in danger?
Exactly.
Is the bridge safe? Right?
But apparently he was wrong about that too.
Well, apparently.
Well, let's assume the worst. Let's say he knew you couldn't get across that bridge. So he's malicious.
Now, does he own the bridge? Because otherwise, he's violated somebody else's property.
Does that matter? How does he violate someone else's property?
He's invited you to wreck the bridge.
Well, he didn't invite you. He answered a question. He didn't say, "Hey, how about going across this bridge? I'll pay you to cross this bridge."
Well, the interesting question in my mind might be whether he implicitly allowed you to cross the bridge or not by you bringing up the question. So I'll bet you the courts, if you left that to the government and you gave it to 10 courts, they'd come up with 10 different answers to the problem.
Yeah, well, you might be right. I was wondering if there's a good libertarian answer. I'm not satisfied with any of the answers, but that may be the nature of life. In some cases, there's not a satisfactory answer. I guess we have to acknowledge that, right?
Right.
Well, I got a ringing one endorsement.
Although Ayn Rand would argue that the truth is there, it's that we don't understand the truth universally.
Yeah.
Right? There is a right answer. We just don't know which one's the right answer.
I wonder what a hardcore Randian would say about that case.
Well, again, as an objectivist, they'd insist that there's a right answer. There is one right answer. But they wouldn't cop to knowing what that answer is.
Peikoff would probably have an answer for you.
Well, for me, the answer is that everybody is so advanced, they're so fonts, and the guy would give you a detailed analysis of the bridge, and would explain what he knows and what he doesn't know, and that would be.
And in California, he would be at fault for not doing that if you asked him.
So the safe thing to say, the safe thing is just say, "I don't know," right? Because I don't see how anyone could get culpability out of that.
Yep. I don't know, and I'm not responsible if you try.
Yeah, please sign this waiver.
Yeah.
Before you cross.
Imagine if you lived in a world where everyone was a sophisticated libertarian.
There wouldn't be bad bridges.
I have been known to warn libertarians that they might someday get what they're asking for, and they ought to think about that every time they make propositions. Because I think we tend to shoot from the hip a whole lot.
Yeah, look, one of the things I think that happens to a maturing libertarian is that you realize there aren't pat automatic answers. There aren't a priori answers to everything.
Right.
And so, okay, I think we can probably end on that note of agreement, although there hasn't been a lot of agreement.
Except the market will decide. That is the answer. It's always the answer, right?
Well, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we're at 5 Pacific time. And so thanks for everyone coming. Next month we'll do intellectual property, so I hope you can make it back for that.
Oh,
it'll be on the Wednesday. I think it's the whatever the first Wednesday is that has double digits in the date, whatever that is. So hopefully I'll see you back. Tell your friends so we get more people here. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.